Hello everyone. Today what we are going to discuss is the systolic valves of the heart. The extraordinarily powerful systolic energy is the pumping upwards through the pulmonary valve on the right side of the heart and through the aortic valve on the left side of the heart. Pulmonary valve is responsible for pumping deoxygenated blood directly up into the lungs, carrying also waste products from the body, the chyle, the waste products from the lymphatic system, and of course, carbon dioxide. This is a very, very powerful concept because today what we're going to look at is not last time we were looking at the diastolic blood pressure. We were looking at the way the diastolic blood pressure pumps down through the right atrium, through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. And then we discussed the mitral concept, the oxygenated blood flowing in to the left side of the heart, carrying oxygen and wonderful lifeblood, pumping down into the left ventricle and then up through the systolic blood pressure of the aortic valve directly into the whole body. So it's so interesting because remember that there's a correlation between the energy field. When we talk about energy, we talk about qi, the extraordinary energy that actually is our life energy. But life energy is carried around the body through shui, the blood. So it should be no surprise that we're looking at the heart as the center of the energy field. So we're going to now look at the PowerPoint so that you can follow me in both Chinese and English. And we're going to literally start with the concept of constitution. Remember, constitution is very, very fascinating because constitution is what we've been born with as a result of ancestral inheritance. The pulmonary constitution is very, very interesting because we call it the youth constitution, the mental journey. This constitution is the child of father. This constitution is the extraordinary energetic constitution of living life, growing, growth, puberty, pubescent. This constitution is about the mental journey, thought, intellect, intelligence. And it's really interesting to just look at constitution. What exactly is constitution? We've discussed it in our previous videos about how we are born with personality, how our ancestors create our constitution. When we are brought into this world, that moment when we are conceived becomes the moment when we come into the world. But our conception is based on ancestral memories, ancestral appearance, ancestral constitutions which go back in time. So when we talk about constitution, we have to be very careful not to confuse this concept with phases in our lives and also what we refer to as the heart log. So let's just look at the pulmonary constitution. This constitution is vibrant, elegant, very slender, very active, very youthful, always looking on the bright side of life, open ideas, ideology, learning, school, institutes, like universities, always striving to be the best. The pulmonary constitution is vibrant, elegant, slender, and always looking towards being, self-worth is a very key concept. Respect about the environment, respect about nature. Self-worth is a very complex concept. It's a very concept. I love this picture. I just want to stay there for a second because the pulmonary constitution is in the valley with the mountains above. And this is rather fascinating because the mountains represent the constitution of the tricuspid, the father. And so the pulmonary constitution is always looking up towards the father constitution. And so interestingly enough, when we look about the pulmonary constitution, we are very fascinated by this concept that it is a right-sided, right heart constitution. This constitution is tied up with the organs of the breathing, obviously the pulmonary valve leading directly into the lungs. And also, this concept is fascinating because we're talking a little bit about the systolic energy, the pumping upwards from the heart into the into the lungs. But when we look at the concept of the hollow organ of the heart, we look at the small intestines, and the constitutional hollow organ valve, of course, is the ileocecal valve. And this is the valve that pumps upwards through the ascending colon. But this is also very, very interesting that the constitution, the pulmonary valve, is not just about breathing in the lungs. It's about the skeleton. It's about reproductive organs. And fundamentally, it's about the skin. Now, the skin is very, very intriguing because it's one of the largest organs in the body. Not only is it's hard to call it an organ because it's made up of internal and external. The internal skin is very, very large indeed. It is the alveolar macrophage and the alveolar of the lungs. If you stretch out the skin in the lung, it would cover a football pitch. Likewise, inside the small intestines, you have the little alveoli, the villi that actually snatch the food. So it's very interesting that the skin is so extraordinarily complex. And the truth is that the pulmonary constitution is all about energy exchange. The energy exchange, the elimination of carbon dioxide, making way for oxygenated blood to pour into the lungs and to actually be carried around the body through the hemoglobin in the erythrocytes. But this is a two-way system, and it's very complex indeed. I want to talk a little bit here with the pulmonary constitution about the dermis. Within the dermis, we have a fascinating fretwork, network of stem cells called the megakaryocytes. These stem cells are responsible for a feedback mechanism from the outside environment, the internal environment. And it's so interesting because the megakaryocytes are responsible for protecting the skin, protecting both the internal and external skin by producing little blood platelets. These blood platelets, sometimes known as thrombocytes, are also responsible for making sure that the skin is safe, that it's waterproof, that it's whole. So let us go back to these concepts of the megakaryocytes and the protection of the pulmonary valve and the skin and the internal and external environment. These megakaryocytes are stem cells, and they are produced in the bone marrow in the megakaryoblast. These megakaryoblast are also fascinating because they are responsible for the entire function of the bone marrow production of all the blood cells, both red and white. So whenever there is injury to the dermis, the pulmonary dermis, whether it be internal or external, there will always be a connection with the bone marrow through these megakaryocytes. So it's very, very fascinating. But I'm probably going ahead of myself a little bit, because what I want to explain is that whilst the pulmonary constitution has key organs that it's linked with, such as the breathing and the lungs, the skeleton and the right-sided reproductive organs, we must never forget this concept of energy exchange through the internal and external skin and protection. The mental journey is really fascinating because when we look at damage on the mental journey, we relate it to something very aggressive, chronic and inflammatory, right-sided. The concept of the mental journey is very, very interesting because it starts at conception, but it really, really is linked with that first breath of life. When we talk about conception, that's our first breath of spiritual life. But when we are born, that is our first breath of independent life. The mental journey is current, this life. It's not about the past. It's not about the ancestry, except of what we inherit. But it's about growing up in youth, learning and studying. It's the second quarter of our lives. And it's very, very interesting because it's particularly linked with the age between 7 and 21. 7 to 14, the first stage of puberty. and 14 to 21, the second stage. This is very intriguing indeed. What is so fascinating about constitution is that constitution is our personality. It's how we deal with life. It's what we do in our lives, how we cope with whatever is happening. And this concept of the pulmonary constitution, who is so vibrant and longing to be accepted, their sense of self-worth is very, very, very important. They want people to be proud of them. And who in particular does the pulmonary constitution want pride and dignity from? It's actually their father, because this is child of father. So the tragedy is that when this beautiful little vibrant soul is hurt, the real cruelty, the real pain is rejection, not being believed in, not being understood, not being loved, not being sort of believed in and negated, maybe dismissed, maybe treated with sarcasm and possibly not the favorite child. And whilst we were talking about the pulmonary constitution being damaged by the environment, rejection being very, very key, there is also a very close relationship between the pulmonary constitution and the mother. Intriguingly enough, a mother who is absent in the child's life can often create pulmonary constitutional blockage. An absent mother, she may not be absent on purpose. She could be absent because she's busy working. She could be absent because she's unhappy or ill, or even absent because she's just not there, a broken home. So many things can damage a child and create a chronic breakdown in this constitution. It's so interesting, though, because if this child, pulmonary child, is hurt with rejection, they behave in a rather interesting way. First thing that happens is that they literally remove themselves from the pain. They become isolated and they may shut themselves in a room and not want to be with their friends because they've lost confidence in themselves. They cry internally. They often suffer with very serious constitutional complications like sinusitis. And this, of course, is interesting because the problems will always be right-sided. Now, I've taught you, all of you, to understand what how you evaluate a constitution. And remember that to evaluate a constitution, you always look at your patient. You look at their physiology, you look at their body shape. The pulmonary constitution is tall, lean, elegant, and slender. They often have very, very fast metabolism. So they often, it doesn't matter what they eat, they tend to really be slim. They are the envy of other constitutions who, it doesn't matter what they eat, they tend to put on weight. But the interesting thing about the pulmonary constitution is that they can lose weight to the extent of being extremely unwell. Pulmonary constitution literally denies themselves fresh air and oxygen, friends, fun, family, isolation. And unfortunately, what's happening in the world today is having a devastating effect on the youth. It's having a devastating effect on people who have this pulmonary constitution, because being locked and isolated in not being able to move freely is very, very crippling spiritually and psychologically. Having a negative effect on the lungs and the breathing and the reproduction, causing infertility. We've already mentioned all the internal and external skin complications. RNA tricuspid valve damage. If you have a pulmonary constitution, it is extremely aggressive. It is affecting the breathing, it's affecting the skin, the digestive system, it's causing massive psychological trauma, loss of self-worth, loss of self-esteem, sinus complications, particularly around the eyes, tonsillitis, laryngeal tonsils, right-sided tubal tonsil complications, thyroid, calcitonin complications, breathing, serious complications with systolic blood pressure, complications with ascending colonic imbalances, massive complications with the pancreas and the nucleotide. This, of course, links immediately to the problems of celiacs and internal digestive imbalance, the gustatory path seriously breaking down. So here we have some examples of tall, lean and slender pulmonary constitution, a father, and active, youthful, and we'll move on. Elegant, slender, beautiful. So the colors of the pulmonary constitution are fascinating. They are vibrant, bright jewelry colors: green grass, green trees, green, 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 the lungs, the right-sided heart. Always remember that we have two hearts, we have two organs, always two kidneys, two lobes of the liver, two hearts. It's really fascinating that very few people understand this concept of right and left, RNA versus DNA. The correlative color of this incredibly bluey green, turquoise and green is this wonderful flame fire color, ice versus fire. We've already discussed the lung meridian and the respiration, exercise and the lymphatic system. So every single constitutional formula and the breathe freely, the heart path 3, has the relationship with the superfit, the tree formulas. And the first of the tree formulas that breathe freely is related to is this incredible Deodar spruce, the formula of the tree of God. This incredible tree formula is responsible for supporting people whenever they have any constitutional respiration and lymphatic system, and possibly from a spiritual point of view, recovery from rejection. And of course, how do we recover from rejection? It's a very difficult one, is forgiveness. Male fertile. Now, this is a particularly right-sided concept. The male energy, the right side of the body, is very much the male energy. And male fertile, the superfit 7, the tree formula, which is also a spruce, it's a lovely pine tree, is for the bladder meridian, testosterone, sperm, potency, virility, masculinity, male puberty, and male baby. Now, I just want to talk a little bit about the right-sided concept. This is so interesting because the hormones through the right side of the body are luteinizing hormone, interstitial cell stimulating hormone, prolactic releasing inhibition hormone in the hypothalamus, gonadotrophin in the hypothalamus, the releasing hormones, leading right the way down into the thyroid, where we're looking at calcitonin and the parathyroid calcitonin. Then we look down towards the adrenal glands and we look at adrenal testosterone, adrenal androsterone and aldosterone in the adrenal glands, the kidney hormone. And then we go to the reproductive organs, and for the male it is testosterone, but the female it is progesterone. So this is the alkaline pathway through calcium and potassium. And it's so very interesting to understand that everything that damages our environment, everything that is this concept of the RNA tricuspid damage, has a right-sided effect of depletion of reproductive organs, a depletion of testosterone, interference with female. We'll come back now to a particularly important flower formula, HF17, flower formula 17, arum lily. This formula is a right-sided formula. This is the formula for fertility. For women, it is the formula for luteinizing hormone, calcitonin, progesterone, and for the kidneys, the adrenal testosterone and adrenal aldosterone. So this is a very, very, very important formula. Obviously, we have two superfit formulas, one for male and one for female, female 8. If it is a right-sided pathway, we would use flower formula 17 for women, together with the superfit 8 for women. the broad spectrum superfid 8. But let's just look at the other flower formulas that are linked with the male side of the body, the RNA, tricuspid pulmonary side of the body. Here we have a formula called Facilia. Now, Facilia is very, very powerful. It's for the sinus tonsils, HF6, called clear senses. And this Facilia formula is very, very important. It's particularly powerful for people who've been damaged on the right side of the body, who suffer with lack of self-worth, low self-esteem, tears, crying, internalized crying, isolation, loss, all the things that are happening so much to our children today. HF9 bluebell is the formula called apostat. It's the formula for the thyroid, and of course the thyroid control on the right side is the control of calcitonin, calcium. Flower formula 10, HF10 nicotiana, is very, very important indeed for this constitution. It's called breath of life, which makes a very clear understanding. We often use this formula for people when they suffer with cancer, because cancer has a great deal to do with the origin of imbalance in the pulmonary valve and not getting enough oxygen, not being able to breathe properly. Massively important, this formula, for rejection, forgiveness, and for the lungs, for breathing. And then we have another formula, which is pulmonary, which is called HF14, daffodil, for skin beauty. And we've discussed skin in quite a lot of length. But there's also something else about the pulmonary constitution, and this is actually tied up with vanity. You know, the child who looks in the mirror and sees themselves as fat. And so there is a massive complication here psychologically. When the pulmonary valve is damaged, the manifestation is often a sense of complete loss of self-esteem, a complete loss of pride and dignity, a total aggression against oneself, an abuse, self-abuse, self-harming. I am sad to say that I see so many young people today and their tragedies based on this horrendous self-harm, horrendous loss of things, because children should be out there with all their friends. They should be experimenting with relationships. They should be having fun. And then not, you see, the pulmonary valve is innocent, incredibly innocent. And innocence has been denied to our young people in modern society with all this fear and aggression. So these formulas play a very important role in helping one to understand the whole sort of pattern of breakdown, particularly RNA tricuspid, because whatever happens to the tricuspid valve will seriously manifest right the way through the right side of the body, down through into the ventricle. And of course, that will impact on the systolic blood pressure. Often, because this pulmonary valve blocks very easily when there's tragedy, what happens is the blood pressure becomes very high. This is interesting because if there is a blockage in the pulmonary valve, the bundle of His will immediately activate the blood pressure through the tricuspid valve and push even harder to restabilize and balance this congestion. Remember also that when we look at the hollow organ of these valves, the hollow organ of the heart, the valve that is utterly dependent on the function, the healthy function of the pulmonary valve, is the ileocecal valve. So that little quadrant right down in the left, in the right side of the inguinals, often what happens is those lymphatic glands will become incredibly congested as well, so they will not clear. So, as we've already said, this constitution has dignity, they're perfectionist, respect and pride. They are beautiful, vital and slender, youthful, with a wonderful sense of life, love and fun, independent, confident, full of self-worth, proud, capable, artistic, sporty. We didn't really cover that. This constitution loves to exercise. And actually, when they're unhappy, they may even over-exercise. They love the fresh air and the outdoors. This is a fun, fabulous constitution, gregarious, and lovely. They walk into a room with confidence. You'll always recognize the pulmonary constitution by their appearance. They're often very smart. They love to dress well. They look beautiful. They look elegant. They look connected. But when they're unhappy, they tend to withdraw and isolate themselves, and withdraw and diminish. So they look diminished, shy, lack of self-worth, lack of confidence, and often lonely, extremely lonely. So when this constitution is blocked, they become incredibly negative, aloof, cold, impotent, frigid, infertile. They cannot forgive. Dissatisfied with life, they feel very embittered and cannot forgive. They distance themselves from their friends, become remote and withdrawn. Unsure of themselves, they are shy, self-absorbed, self-centered, and incredibly selfish, and almost narcissistic. Actually, a negative pulmonary valve person can be quite nasty. They can be aggressive, cruel. They're not aggressive physically, but they can be very cruel with words. Actually, it can be very unpleasant to come up against a negative pulmonary person, because they can be so they can be evil and cruel and wicked, and use words to hurt, like a cut knife. They can use knives like a saber sword and cut through people and destroy them. But this is also a very, very damaged concept, because the most heartbreaking illness, which occurs as a result of this inability to forgive people who've been cruel, what is so fascinating is that often people who cannot forgive become very ill. And one of the most tragic illnesses is that it creates cancer. And often, when you're helping people to recover from cancer, one of the first things one has to do is look at the heart log and see who, how, and when this patient was hurt. How were they hurt, and why have they not been able to move forward from it? And usually the hurt is very cruel, very deep, very abusive, and very evil. So it's not always easy to forgive people who've been cruel. So how do we help this concept? How do we help the pulmonary valve constitution to recover? Well, we teach them. We give them knowledge. We forgive them. We help them to forgive. We help them to achieve. We help them to strive for perfection. We honor them. We're proud of them. And we tell them that we're proud of them. We help them to learn from their tragedies. We refrain from treating them with sarcasm. And if they're sarcastic, we laugh and remove the stigma of the sarcasm. We don't allow them to use that weapon. And loyalty above all. What damages the pulmonary valve? There are many illnesses that damage the pulmonary valve. And above all, one of the most complex is airborne virus. There are many viruses. There are millions of viruses in the environment. And of course, we all know now viruses have been brought to the very fore of our lives. Airborne pollution, airborne virus, particularly tuberculosis, polio, pneumococcus, pertussis. These are all complex airborne viruses that float around. And most of us build up an incredible immunity. But there are new strains of virus occurring all the time. So the pulmonary valve, the right-sided valve,